Hey, and welcome back to How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, James Burt, and him, the podpreneur, Alex Chisnall. Today on the podcast, he just gets so annoyed about it. If it's your first time listening, sorry. For context purposes, Alex hates when I do weird voices. So I do as many as possible. Yes, you do. Don't pretend you don't talk to me horribly behind the scenes just because we've got the lovely listener and the watcher with us now.
Hello, Johnny.
The true Chisnell's coming out now. Today on the pod, we're talking about analytics. What metrics actually matter the most? Now, you will hear this all the time.
Easy for you to say.
Hey, very easy for me to say. Analytics, what metrics matter the most? See, I've said it twice on the bounce. Who would have thought that would happen? If you've been on... especially LinkedIn, I think. If you've been on LinkedIn, you would have heard the whole thing of, you got to look at this metric or that metric, or you can't monetize your podcast until you get to 10,000 downloads, or you need 1,000 subscribers so you can monetize and all that stuff. But there's so many numbers that are chucked out there. I thought it'd be useful in this episode for us to break down what actually matters, what metrics actually should you be looking at, and what you can then do with the information that those analytics actually give you. So if I was to say to you the most important metric, Chisnell, give me one.
Numbers. No, I disagree, Mr. Chisnell. Huh? What? For me, okay. And look, there's no point tracking a load of metrics if you're not going to do anything with them.
Very true.
Okay, and if you don't understand what any of them actually mean, and I think the vast majority of people out there are doing that, haven't got a clue. But what I think I've learned over the years and speaking to different brands, potential sponsors, different creators, is average consumption of the podcast is a really important metric, because you could be pumping content out all day long, 2, 3, 4 hours an episode if you want. But if people are literally listening to the first couple of minutes of it and no one is listening to the rest of it, every other metric is irrelevant.
Yes, very true.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you've got 1 million followers and 10 million views. If they're only listening to the first 60 seconds or 120 seconds, that's not valuable to anybody, really.
No, absolutely. And you can look for those metrics on most of the platforms now. So Apple for podcasters has it built into the back end.
YouTube.
I know Spotify for creators does. YouTube does. And that retention, or that watch time as they call it on YouTube, is really important. If you go into the analytics, you can normally see that. It also shows... It kind of forms or formats the way that the show's got to work. So if, like you say, with the drop-off rate, you will get a massive drop in the first 2 minutes. It always happens.
YouTube,
the biggest drop will happen in that period of time, because you get a lot of transient clickers who just see the content. It might autoplay for them, or they click on it because they like the thumbnail or whatever. So your job, knowing full well that you're probably going to get like a 50% drop-off rate in the first 2 minutes anyway. It is what it is. But that being the case, how many people can you hook as quickly as possible? Which is why the format of podcasts, I think, has changed recently from having 7 minutes of adverts straight away before you heard any content. What a lot of them are doing now is giving value. So that's why you're now hearing like a key moment clip with a bit of underpinning music, or like a banging trailer that's become really, really super popularized. That format of content is designed to keep people hooked, so you get past that initial drop off, but you are still going to get quite a big drop. But the sort of average retention or the watch time is only one metric. The other things I think are really important to understand, it doesn't matter how big your audience is, but just to make sure, looking at, is it going in the right direction? Are your subscriber, even if it's 1 subscriber a month, 2 subscribers a month, if you're doing a niche show, is it going in the right direction? Even if you can see it on the podcast listing apps as well, is your listen time going up? Is your the overall download numbers going in the right direction? Now, again, if you have a month where, let's say, for example, that you're ticking over, you get 1,000 downloads per episode. That's not bad numbers. In fact, that's pretty good numbers. But let's say, for example, one podcast episode does 2,000 downloads, whereas your average is 1,000. You can look at that, and to your point a minute ago, it's important to understand what the numbers are actually showing you, and then make decisions and take actions based on that. So let's say, for example, you're doing a general sort of, let's say you're doing a health and fitness show, and you do one episode, because I've got into it over Christmas, you're talking about ice baths. And that gets double the amount of downloads. Now, that's not to say that twice as many people want to hear you just talk about ice baths, but that would be worth looking at and going, cool. Like, is that biohacky optimization of health? Is that interesting? So would you do another ice bath episode? Would you do one about other biohacking optimization? Would you do one about nootropics? Would you do one about certain different things? And then you can read the metrics and go, okay, cool. Well, we found this for one of our clients. Anytime, because they're in the financial space, anytime we used a numeric in the title, the download numbers went up by 25%.
Say that again.
So every time in the title we used a numeric, i.e. like, 25% of people need this, the numbers would jump by 25% every single time, and it didn't matter what the number was. So when we knew that, we knew the title just had to have a number in it. We had to make sure there's a number within the episodes. And again, it was always consistently growing whenever you include a numeric. So that kind of stuff is really important. There's loads of places that you can get analytics. There's a one that I've just signed us up to, which I'm about to tell you about actually. And I'll sign back in because I haven't looked at it for a little while. But things like whichever RSS feed you've got, whether you're using Captivate, Spotify for Creators, Buzzsprout, Libsyn, they have all got analytics. And my top advice would be look at
your
those.
hosting platform will have it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Some of them will only give you certain detailed analytics if you're paying a certain amount of money. I mean, you don't necessarily need that. But if you're looking for, we talked about on a previous episode, how to monetize even a small audience. If you can say, hey, we might only have a small audience, but they're all in Lithuania, Mr. Lithuanian potential sponsor. You can see that normally on your RSS syndication software. So look at that kind of stuff and make decisions based on it. The other platform, as I say, YouTube do a good job of it.
YouTube, you could almost become lost in it because there's it's brilliant, but there are so many numbers there that, again, is that serving you to be tracking absolutely everything? I mean, my advice is to pick a couple and track them regularly. Review them regularly and make decisions based on that information. Otherwise, there is no point.
I also think and to your point there, it's really good to look at not just podcast directly related stuff, but let's say, for example, one of your key things is that your podcast is trying to drive to a newsletter. Then look at your newsletter subscriptions. Is that going up? Look at your TikTok, your Instagram, your Snapchat, your YouTube channel, making sure that those numbers are always going up in the right direction. And again, not to get overly lost in the numbers, but it would be a really good idea potentially to have like a spreadsheet, for example, and go, okay, well, January we had X amount, February we had X amount, March we had X amount. And then you could look at it and go, okay, cool. Well, in March we had a big jump up. Well, what was the difference? Okay, well, we were doing more ice bath content. I keep going down the ice bath route because I'm just obsessed with an ice bath.
Just got an ice bath.
But that, for example, you can make decisions. You can only make decisions based on data that you're actually looking at. So number one, you have to track it. And number two, you have to make decisions based on it to see if there is causation for growth with certain types of content.
Yeah, and a couple of times I would say, talking about cost per melee before, and I remember making the switch to advertising to monetize my podcast and literally getting this American agency that had approached me to put, and I didn't want them to do this. This is just what they did. I agreed with it. The numbers look good. And they put 6 ads per episode into my podcast. Every episode had 6 ads. And my numbers went from 30,000 at the time to below 10,000 like that.
Wow,
people
really?
Whatever the figure was again, 87% of my audience were UK based, not used to at the time, going back a few years now, it was during lockdown again. And it was off the back of a Clubhouse, somebody reaching out, but UK audience was not listening to six adverts per episode, and a number of those ads were to go and listen to American podcasts, which vast majority of people have no interest in, particularly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So literally the figures dropped below the floorboards. So what did I do? I made a decision and ended the contract early. And they were like, yeah, but we're paying you X. And I was like, I don't care, but I'm not going to have an audience left to actually...
To monetize anything.
Anything. I can't go now out to somebody else and monetize this because 66% of my audience has literally disappeared in weeks.
Which you will have, and we talked about this on a previous episode when we talked about monetizing your podcast. You have to bear in mind that any addition of a sponsor or an advertising message is potentially a dilution of the quality of your content.
Yeah.
Because people don't like ads. You know, we are just been trained we've also been trained to consume them, but in the majority of instances, people don't like it. So bear that in mind, that you will potentially lose audience if you have too many ads in, for sure.
And also I would say, don't necessarily overreact. And by that I mean, I had a client I was consulting with, and every week they would change the length of their episode based on the average listen time of the previous week's episode.
God. Every week?
Every week.
Yeah, that's too much.
Way too much. So by that I mean their average podcast could have been an hour, and they were looking and they were going, okay, the average listen time for the last episode was 80%, okay? Before the audience would significantly drop off. So then they would tweak it by like a minute, so it would drop down so it would go back up so that 90% of people are listening, and then they would find the next week it dropped down again. So then they would extend it by 2 minutes, and I was just like, guys, what are you doing? You're being overrun and overruled by all of the information at your fingertips. The data is driving all the decisions, which again, I wholeheartedly agree with looking at it, but I do think you can overreact. Ultimately, it's a conversation, and you want people to listen to that conversation. You want it to feel natural. You don't want to be chopping and changing all the time.
Yeah, you can overstudy it, couldn't you? I think one of the, sort of as a summary of this episode, I think what would be really good is to decide what are those key metrics for you.
Yep, agreed.
And for me, that would be the numbers of monthly listeners going up.
Yeah.
Is the watch time because this is the other thing you get as your views increases, your watch time probably will drop because you're getting more people going through the funnel effectively. So I would be looking at, are your subscriber numbers going up? Is your monthly listeners going up? Is your watch time staying about the same as your numbers are increasing? And then the other thing that I'd be looking at in terms of sort of a final statistic is, are your social channels also growing?
Exactly what I was going to say.
And then have those almost like data-centric goals that you've created, and say to yourself, okay, well, we want to be hitting a minimum, because I think it is important to have a goal, because otherwise you're just doing stuff for the sake of it. We want to be getting a minimum of 10% per month growth. And you might be listening to this going, well, 10% is not a lot. But if you start with 10%, compounded over an annual basis, that ends up adding up to quite a bit over a period of time. And again, to your point about how often you'll look at this stuff, do it monthly. So maybe on the first of the month, you've got a calendar reminder that says, check podcast analytics, and then measure, optimize, tweak, change, get feedback, and go again on a monthly basis. But like I say, don't do it on a weekly basis or a daily basis or an episodic basis. Because you can over-egg the pudding.
Question.
Yes, please, sir.
Are we doing that with this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you not been doing I thought you were doing the report.
Oh.
Are we doing this with this podcast?
Thank you for listening to How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast.
Do as we say, not as we do.
We'll be back again with another episode next week.